Welcome in on a Sunday morning, 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk, and we are protecting military families as we do every Sunday morning with the owner of Brochu Law, Chris Brochu. How are we doing on a Sunday morning, Chris?
Good morning, Casey. Doing well. We got a special guest here today. Keith Maynard, shareholder at Spore Dodd, is here joining us. Before we get into our introduction with him, we just want to remind all of our listeners out there, if you have a military benefit claim, legal right that you're unaware of, maybe it's something, your VSO has told you this is all you're entitled to. The VA says, hey, this is, all you're going to get. Or some attorney says, hey, we don't know what to do with this, military claim. Give us a call. We're happy to evaluate it for you. Our consultation's free. If we find that you are leaving, some benefit on the table or some legal right that we could pursue, we would enter into a fee agreement. All of our military clients and consumer clients we represent on a contingency fee basis. So the only way we get paid is if you get paid, and we advance all costs on behalf of our military families and consumers. With that being said, please welcome Keith to the show. Keith, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I'm happy to be here.
And Keith, just to sort of get our listeners into the flow of what you do, Keith is a board-certified aviation law expert. We're going to be hitting a ton of sort of aviation topics this morning, and you're also a former pilot or a current pilot?
So I still have my commercial FAA license, but I'm not current. So and I blame that primarily on having two small children. But I used to fly for the Army, used to fly BlackHawk helicopters for about 10 years, and recently retired. Well, recently as of 2016, retired. Not flying anymore. But once I have the free time, I'll probably get into some civilian flying. Just currently don't have the time.
Well, thank you for your service to this country. And before we get into any of the litigation stories and how you received your board certification, can you tell us a little bit about your military background and where you grew up and some of your background info?
Sure. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, Montgomery County, Maryland. My father is a retired FBI agent, also worked for the State Department. And, growing up as a kid, I was at FBI headquarters a lot, shooting guns with my dad. So it was, kind of a lot of fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And in high school, there was a program where you could work for the FBI as like an intern in the summer, a paid intern. And I got to work in the chemistry and toxicology lab. So, I was working in there with agents and scientists that were working on, high-level cases. At one point in the lab next to the one I was in, I'm a 17-year-old kid at this point. They were bringing in, bones from the Jeffrey Dahmer case and examining them. Some of the agents I worked with worked on the Lockerbie, Scotland, terrorist case. My boss actually testified in the OJ trial, so it was pretty cool, fun stuff, and that really got me sort of the bug to get into working for the FBI and doing the same type of stuff that my dad did. So basically, after about 2 summers of doing that, they stopped the program, and I was looking at a way to sort of get my credentials ready to go work for the FBI. And that's how I found the military. So I got into University of Delaware. I had been accepted there. But before that, I signed up for the Army and basically went away to basic training right before I started. And I signed up for the Reserve/National Guard. And that's kind of how I got my start as an enlisted guy.
And when you enlisted into the military, how did you end up in aviation? So
I started out as an infantry soldier, and I spent about 5 years, worked my way up to an E5, so you go away to basic training, then you go away to basically advanced training, which is, I forget what they call it now, but for infantry enlisted stuff. And I was a gunner, I was team leader, worked my way up to a squad leader. and at the University of Delaware, basically joined the ROTC program because my father was also a Vietnam, military advisor, infantry officer, was there in 1968. So I kind of knew his route, how he got into the FBI. So I was sort of trying to mirror that. So what I did was I got commissioned right after college. And at that time, I mean, you had to have, excellent, like basically a 4.0, excellent credentials to become even an infantry officer on active duty or an aviation officer or military intelligence. And those were kind of my top three choices. Suffice it to say, I didn't have the pedigree, in my opinion, to make it in that selection process. So I stayed in the Guard in my unit as an infantry officer, and they basically, they send you away to Fort Benning, Georgia. You go through the infantry officer course. I did that, and I was an infantry officer until probably 2005. And I was in law school when 9/11 happened. I was in my third year.
Wow.
We got called on active duty. I had to drop out of law school basically on a Friday after being told on a Wednesday that, we're being called up.
I got to stop you right there because I got to, and then you please continue. So you're in law school in your 3L year.
Yeah.
9/11 happens.
Yeah.
You get a call. I mean, boots on the ground, Afghanistan, October 7th, 01. I mean, that's when TSGLI started. So I'm assuming that's when I'm sure we had other boots on the ground, but that's when they first recognized it. So that is literally the start of your 3L year. That is the same time period they say, all right, Keith, let's go.
My commander called me up. My brother was interviewing me for just kind of like some school project, his college school project. And he was asking me a question about, well, do you think you guys will be called up? And I said, well, National Guard hasn't been called up. And I didn't know the exact statistics, but I was like, it probably since like Vietnam, and I got my phone rang right then. And it was my commander saying, hey, you need to be here on Friday for a year, at least a year. And I said, well, I'm in law school. And he said, well, you got to quit law school for a year. So basically I went into my administration, said, I got to take a leave of absence for a year. And yeah, that was it. We showed up and, we had no idea where we were going. We ended up staying stateside. We went to Bragg and did a whole train up and everything. I think 10th Mountain Division had initially fell in on Aberdeen proving grounds in the Baltimore area or north of Baltimore. And the reason they went there is because I had no idea of what was there. There was a lot of chemical weapons there, a lot of labs that, there was mustard gas that was basically sitting out on the Chesapeake Bay, and there was nothing guarding it, nothing. So the 10th Mountain fell in on that and basically started guarding it because, at this point now, all targets, basically any military base was now a target, and certainly the more sensitive places in the D.C. area like, Aberdeen that had that stuff, Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, had a lot of these sort of chemical type weapons there. So we replaced 10th Mountain. They went to Afghanistan and we stayed there, basically guarding stuff for a year. And that, what I anticipated was it was going to be more of that if I stayed in the infantry and the National Guard. And I ran into a pilot on base and said, hey, are you guys looking for pilots? And he said, yeah. And so I went through that process, passed all the testing. And once they had a slot open up, that's when I got into aviation.
Wow. Thank you for your service. Incredible. So when do you go back to law school? What's the gap between when you're in your 3L year and when you are able to return to law school?
So because we were actually fairly close to where I was going to law school, which was in Baltimore, it was University of Baltimore. Once we sort of, initially got in, fell in on the base, built up whatever guard stations and security they had to do, there wasn't a ton of, as an infantry officer, you're kind of managing a platoon. And, each day there's really only like a team or a squad of guys on these positions, and they had to stay there for 24 hours a day. So it was kind of a, security job for our guys. And it actually gave me the ability to start taking some of the classes towards the end of the deployment, like starting up before the deployment even ended. So I'd say I was probably out for just about not quite a year, like 8 months maybe. I was able to start up and then finished kind of in the winter, and then took the bar exam and passed in Maryland, and that's kind of where I started practicing law, was in Maryland.
And how'd you end up down here in Jacksonville, Florida?
So I started out as a public defender on the Eastern Shore in Maryland, like Salisbury, Maryland, and
great lacrosse up there, right?
Yeah, the whole area's got great lacrosse. My nephew's actually getting recruited by colleges, and he's already gotten called by Air Force and Navy, so pretty excited about that.
How did you know that?
What?
The lacrosse thing. Are you a lacrosse player?
I wouldn't claim to be. I played one year. Yeah, a couple of my boys were really good and convinced me to join my senior year, so I just kind of rode their coattails. But it was super fun. I think it's a great sport. I mean, I had an absolute blast. It's kind of like
Did you play defense?
No, I think I was mid.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like a mixture between football and hockey, really. I mean, it's physical. It's a lot of cardio. I mean, it's super fun.
It's fun, yeah. I mean, the thing now is that the stick skills, you got to develop them at a young age, because it's like hockey. You think it's just run around hitting people, but it's a lot of finesse. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I ended up down there on the Eastern Shore, and there's not a lot of big firms down there. The only people that are hiring were the prosecutors or the public defender's office, and actually the prosecutor wasn't hiring. That's kind of what I envisioned that I wanted to do. But the public defender's office was hiring, and so I did it. And within a week, I was trying cases. I mean, they just throw you into the fire. And I thought it was great because, first of all, there were not a lot of expectations of you, And what I mean by that is your barometer for success was kind of doing your best and knowing that the cards were all stacked against you anyways. And, if you lost a case, a lot of times, they weren't like, how could you lose this case? It could be a guy that showed up at the courthouse for a traffic ticket and had cocaine on his seat. I mean, that was my first case where a guy got jail time and the cop walked by and saw cocaine on the seat. And I felt bad that the guy got jail time. And, my boss said to me, look, what did you expect? He had cocaine on his seat. And I said, but it feels bad when somebody that you're representing gets jail time. But it did, it opened my eyes to see a lot of, just a lot of the, I guess, discrepancy in some of these cases where, look, sometimes they're arresting the wrong people, or there's not a lot of evidence, and people that don't have the means to hire an attorney really are looking to you to help them. I mean, some of the cases, yeah, you've got a lot of repeat offenders, but, you're handling a ton of cases, you're given a lot of responsibility. And so it kind of opened my eyes to trial law. And that was the first time where I saw myself doing something different than maybe going into the FBI. And kind of a long-winded way to get back to the answer to your question, which is while I was down there doing that, that's when a slot opened for flight school. So I went away to flight school for a little over a year. You have to go through another officer, you got to go through aviation officer basic course. And when I was finished with that, a friend of mine from kind of college and the Northeast area was building houses in St. Augustine, Florida. It was 2006, and they were looking for an attorney to help them close all their loans because the title companies they were dealing with, they just weren't real satisfied with. And, he was like, oh, look, we're making a lot of money. This could be a great business. And we live at the beach. And I was already living at the beach in Delaware, and I figured, well, better, longer season in Florida. So that's how I ended up moving to Florida. And of course, 2008 happened. Their building company went out of business. We shut down the title company. He went back to Pennsylvania, and I stayed and just was, kind of threw out my own shingle, much like yourself, had my own practice for a number of years. And then I moved up to the Jacksonville area, worked for a firm called Wood, Adder & Wolf, and was doing kind of everything. I was doing criminal defense, family law, bankruptcy, little bit of PI stuff. But, and then, got deployed for a year in 2011. Got married, got deployed for a year, like a month later.
A month after you got married, you were deployed?
Yeah, I mean, my wife already thought I had commitment issues because it took us about 8 years to get engaged, and then we get married, and I leave for a year. So, she wasn't thrilled about it, but she knew that I love flying, and it was something that I really enjoyed doing. And we didn't have children. She was busy because she's a doctor at the Mayo Clinic. And so, I was gone for a year.
Where were you deployed to?
I was in Iraq. So it was in Iraq, and we were in Taji. I was part of, I did a little bit of flying, not a ton of flying over there. I was in the S3 plans, section of a brigade. So we were primarily charged with the logistics and the planning for getting all of our aircraft active duty. We kind of fell in. There was a lot of active duty. It was obviously a ton of active duty there, but our brigade kind of fell in and replaced the brigades that were there. I think there was 2 brigades left, and all the active guys were kind of just like, we just want to get out of here. So they kind of gave us the responsibility of getting all of the units, including active guys, reducing that footprint and getting everybody out of the country by the previously decided date, which I think was sometime in, I want to say November. Yeah, November of like 2011. So.
And you're talking that extract from Iraq?
Yeah,
or
like slowly close down the different bases. We'd have base closing ceremonies. We got to move you got to figure out how to get all those aircraft out of there. And then also, the ground troops are moving out at the same time. So it's a really, it's a really Herculean logistics effort. It was interesting to do. Yeah.
That's incredible. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot. Obviously, we don't rehearse any of this. So I'm just asking you for your opinion, because I found the footage when we were, doing the final extract from Afghanistan. Right. What, you're a pilot, right? You're one of few people that could understand what's going through the minds of these pilots. Can you even imagine being on that tarmac in Afghanistan where you got all these people? And how do you navigate? Okay, we've got people coming in, we're holding off people, we've got people clinging to the plane. Like what would have been, what do you think's going through their head? Well,
I think the situation, essentially what the U.S. was doing in Afghanistan as far as getting everybody out of there was not a lot different than what we were doing in Iraq. Just the circumstances were a lot different.
Sure.
At the time when we were getting out of Iraq, you had a lot of Iranian-backed militias, and you had, kind of smaller units, and there was sort of like there was with the Taliban, but it was like, look, we're not going to shoot at you as you leave because we don't want you to stay. They wanted us out. We kept, we still had State Department people staying there. There was still a good amount of contractors there that were working with the Iraqi government and Iraqi, supporting their aircraft that, either they bought from us or, those types of situations. So, and the government was probably more stable in Iraq when we left. And so we had concerns that something like that might occur as we were doing it. Luckily it didn't. And we got out without any kind of incidents. There were some soldiers that kind of get shot by just random people taking a pot shot at ground troops as they got out. That didn't happen to us. We were on a base in Taji with our aircraft, and basically our aircraft were the last ones out of the country. And then we went into Kuwait, but we still had a lot of contact, and we'd still fly back into Iraq to meet with the Iraqi government and help support their government and military. In Afghanistan, I think it was a much different situation, because when the previous administration had made an agreement with the Taliban, the Afghani government was kind of left out of that. I don't even think they were at the meeting. And so now you've got the Taliban, the way I understand it is they were primarily going around to these different tribal leaders and village leaders and saying, look, you need to be loyal to us, because when the U.S. leaves, then we'll keep you in power, and we're not going to, come kill you guys. But I think when the new administration came in, it was announced how quickly we were going to be getting out of there. That caused a big panic in a lot of the local people. And you had the Taliban coming through the country, essentially, without having to really take a lot of cities or towns. They didn't have to go fight for them. They'd already kind of made agreements that, look, when they leave, we're going to be in charge. There were some, there were some exceptions. I know there were some villages where there was fighting and stuff, but I think it just made for a much different situation and a much bigger panic because in Iraq when we left, that's kind of when ISIS started getting, bigger. But when we were there, it wasn't even really on our radar. We weren't thinking about ISIS. We were thinking about more of these Iranian-backed militias. With the Taliban, they've been around they've been around much longer time. We've been fighting them for a long time, and they were just kind of waiting for us to leave. So I think they were more organized in the sense that when they came through the country, there was sort of a big force coming through there. When we left in Iraq, that just didn't happen.
Keith, let me ask you this one. 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk, protecting military families. I can't be the only one thinking about this when you said it. The logistics of moving planes, and I know you don't mean literally like on the ground because I worked at a private airport. I know it's not what you mean.
Right.
Do you literally have to fly planes to America and then come back and get more planes and take them back when you guys were trying to leave Iraq? How did that exactly work?
A lot of the fixed wing assets, the real big ones. I mean, some of them would go to Kuwait because we were still in Afghanistan. A lot of stuff, some stuff was actually transferred over to Afghanistan, and then a lot of the, most of the fixed wing have a longer range than the helicopters. So a lot of those assets would get, they might go to Germany or they might go to European bases. It wasn't as difficult to get planes out at that time. Now the helicopters and stuff, basically those were all just flown out of the country. We just flew them down to Kuwait, and we've been in Kuwait since the Gulf War. So we have a big footprint in Kuwait. Kuwait government wants us there. So it's pretty well established in Kuwait. So it's still hard because you're dealing with aircraft breaking on the way out. You're worried about, what happens if we're flying out and we've shut down all the bases and we've got to land an aircraft. So you're always flying with multiple aircraft together. That way, if one has to, make an emergency landing or has some issue, you've got another aircraft that can extract the personnel, and then you figure out how to get the aircraft later. So, yeah. But yeah, it's just coordinating all the units and falling back it was challenging.
Didn't sound easy.
Yeah.
That's because when you first said it, I was like, dang, they got to fly them and then come back and get more.
Right.
It just seemed very complicated.
And that's not even including, all of the ground vehicles and all of the cargo stuff. And
the ground guys, that's, and that's the riskiest one because they're flying out through, cities and towns because they would generally fall back into the base. Then they would go out, do patrols and, maybe snatch a high value target if, at that time when we were still doing operations right up till the day they left. But yeah, they're leaving. And so their biggest fear is that people are going to do exactly what happened occasionally, was just, take pot shots at them. Luckily, there was no concentrated attack on any infantry units for the most part as they were leaving. They were mostly, like I said, just people taking an opportunity shot at a caravan leaving. So.
We take our first break of the day. We got more to do, though. Stick with us. Protecting military families, 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. More with Chris and more with Keith right after this. The 7 o'clock hour is upon us, 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. Thanks for getting up early with us after a Jacksonville Jaguar game night last night. We appreciate you being here, though. Early morning, WOKV, protecting military families with Chris Brosher. You like how I got that in, Chris?
I love it. Love it.
Those late night games,
Got
they're
a rep,
getting to
baby.
me. And now we're up early. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of work, but nonetheless, we're excited to be here. And we want you to go back and listen to the first half hour because great conversation, great storytelling from Keith Maynard. You can find that, by the way, WOKV.com, or video version of the show, thanks to Justin at Nova Productions. You can find it on Chris's website, broshulaw.com. Also your YouTube, right?
YouTube as well. Yep.
So you can find it anywhere as Chris continues to become an influencer and give you the information you need to know about protecting military families. Keith, I want you to give the people the information they need to know, though. If they need your help, aviation law, injury law, how can they get in contact with you, and what overall do you guys do at your firm?
Sure. I'm at Spoor and Dodd. We've been around for a while. I've been with the firm for about 8 years, a little over 8 years, but the firm's been there much longer. I think our firm actually has the most board certified aviation attorneys in the state. One of them recently retired.
Can you tell us what it takes to become board certified in aviation?
Yeah, so board certification, not every state has it. Florida does have it, and kind of what it allows you to do is advertise yourself and put yourself out there as an expert in this field of work. Aviation law, they require you to take what I amount to nothing short of a bar exam in that topic. What I do primarily is plaintiff's work that involves, aircraft, any kind of aircraft. That could be, a wrongful death case, injury, could involve the military, could involve product liability. But that's just a small portion of what aviation law under board certification entails. It's got, when they hand you, when you decide after you have to have a certain amount of experience and, handle a certain amount of cases for certain, and you've got to be at least practicing in the state, I think, for 5 years. The criteria are on the Florida Bar's website. But they give you sort of an outline of what you're responsible for knowing as part of this exam. And I think what I do in everyday practice is only one part of like 8 or 9 topics. So you got to learn space law. You got to learn airport use. You got to learn, pilot enforcement actions, like where basically a pilot does something wrong and they have certain rights to defend themselves if the FAA wants to revoke their license. They're, buying and selling aircraft. There's a whole other, type of law that deals with that. Airspace. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff. What I thought was really kind of interesting and is really an up and coming topic that I don't really do, but learned about as part of that was the whole space law, because Florida actually has a whole legal, basically part of the state, which is like the Space Coast,
like Satellite Beach in that area.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole legal entity that's created to deal with space. And now that you've got all these private companies getting into that field, it's very interesting. Just hearing the amount of insurance they have to send an aircraft into space is mind-boggling. Yeah, and I almost slipped there because Blades of Glory was on last night, and Will Ferrell said mind-boggling. And then the guy's like, "Did you say mind-boggling?" And he goes, "Yeah, when your thoughts are all crazy, like they're in a bottle and you just got to bottle them up." So anyway, I almost say mind-boggling. But nevertheless, the space law is like, so I thought that was real interesting to learn. But I mean, some of the stuff it's very dry is like the national, I think it's a NRL, the national, or NR, whatever the National Railroad Act is, that basically deals with how you, the contracts with rail workers, airline workers, unions, all that stuff, and how even the president gets involved in that. So it's very hard to learn a lot of that stuff from a book. So it's a really difficult exam. You also have to understand, you've got to learn about Ntsb investigations. And, and we deal with that a lot because anytime there's an accident in the United States, the Ntsb is charged with investigating it. So they'll be on the scene pretty early. The FAA plays a role in that because obviously aviation accidents go hand in hand with, air traffic controllers and the radar information that that the FAA has for accidents. So it deals with all those different types of law. You take this exam that's, like I said, it's basically a bar exam. And then once you do that, you can put yourself out there as board certified, in aviation law.
And part of being a board certified aviation, expert that only represents plaintiffs is you are representing the families that of Americans that have either been seriously injured or killed in aviation accidents, commercial aviation accidents, military aviation accidents. So anything from, a private plane to a commercial airline to a military plane. Right. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what I really want to get in, because I know a lot of our listeners obviously are military, or this is a super fascinating topic because obviously to become, board certified in aviation, to have your background and to be in that, I mean, that fits like a glove, right? I mean, you already have such a in-depth knowledge of a lot of these topics. Plus now you attach that to the law and what you know about the law. I mean, you're ready to represent military families in these accidents. So can we get into a couple examples of what I know you've told me this in the past, but let's say a flight goes, or a commercial or military airline goes down in international country or over international water, what's the first thing that happens? You get a call from the family, or how do you work up that case? Where do you sue? All of those things.
Well, it depends. The calls, most people don't know. If they know somebody that's in an aviation accident, nobody knows an aviation attorney. They're not like, oh,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you get in a car accident, you know who to call most of the time. If you get divorced, somebody will know that type of attorney. But most families know an attorney, and they'll say, hey, do you know anybody that does this type of work? And that attorney might know, they might not know, but they'll usually have a network of people, like you do, that same way that we met, through a network of attorneys that all do kind of different stuff, but, network together. So that's usually how we'll get a call, is an attorney that got a call from a family member or a friend, and they reach out to us. That's generally how we get our cases. And then the first thing you do is you obviously meet with the client and find out who, what you might be also meeting with the person who was in the accident. Just depends if they survive it or not. And then you kind of figure out who they are. Are they the pilot? Are they a passenger? Or are they a family member of somebody who was one of those things? And then you start to just look. You get a lot of the information you can get initially is going to be online. Aviation accidents tend to make the news right away. It's, car accidents don't necessarily always make the news, but an aviation accident will be on the news right away because it's interesting to people. So you can first, you'll look up the news story, see if there's any pictures of the aircraft. Generally, you can find out the tail number of the aircraft pretty easily online, or sometimes the person coming to see you knows it. A lot of times people will not come to us right away because which means there'll be more stuff online about it. The NTSB will release a preliminary report that just says, okay, an aircraft crashed on this day at this location. Here's the tail number. They don't ever give you the names. They just tell you kind of the basic information, and they say, here's the investigator who's investigating it, and, we'll release a report sometime in the future. Those reports generally take about 2 years to come out. If it's kind of a more high-profile accident, it might be released sooner than that. In a case like Kobe Bryant, or just a case that has more national interest, the NTSB might put more assets towards it, so it might get the report might come out a little sooner. They'll usually do like a factual report, and online they'll put a docket on there, and they'll have interviews from witnesses on there. And this is stuff anybody can go find. Anybody can go on the NTSB's website and look up the docket for any particular aircraft accident. And so when somebody comes to see us, if they've come through that sort of channel of, maybe they've called a law firm that advertises, that does aviation law, and maybe that firm decided they didn't want to pursue the case, they might come to us that way. If they come through a family member. So it could be a couple months down the road, could be a couple years. And then there might be a lot of stuff out there for us to look at. And so that's how we kind of start our investigation. And because a couple of us are pilots ourselves, we have at least enough, enough know-how to take an initial look at it and say, yeah, I think there's something here. I think there's a case here. And if we don't, we have experts that we call, that are pilots or maintainers or radar experts or weather experts. And these are guys that are either still working in those industries, still flying, or, that we've worked on with cases or have testified. And a lot of times we'll call them up and say, hey, what's your feeling on this? So the hardest thing, though, is that, sometimes cases go through several firms, and, the statute of limitations in every state is going to be different. If it's in Florida, it's 2 years. If it's a wrongful death, if the person died, if it's personal injury, it's 4 years. But other states, some states only have like a year statute of limitations for a wrongful death. And so one of the things you have to do is decide, okay, well, where can we file this lawsuit? And how much time do we have? So if the case comes,
Sure.
We've had cases that come to us a couple weeks from another firm before that statute expires, and you're scrambling to get it filed in time, because if you miss that deadline, it's done. You'll never be able to file it.
Absolutely. And just for any listeners out there that are, interested or have been affected by an aviation accident or know someone that has, or anybody that watches this podcast or is learning about more information, what does it cost to hire an aviation law expert like yourself? Who pays? I mean, these experts, we both work cases. So Keith and I are both on the federal court practice committee together. We both represent plaintiffs only. We only represent people. So we go up against, obviously, the Goliaths, the government, big insurance, big corporations. The experts cost a ton of money. Who advances all those costs? What does it cost for a family to hire you to represent them?
So we do. We forward all those costs. The family, it's kind of like, a car accident case. You've probably seen ads on the news or not the news, but on TV where people say, look, you don't have to pay us anything, as if that's some special incentive. You don't have to pay, plaintiffs' attorneys anyways, when it's usually like an injury case, because you're allowed to do contingency fee contracts. Certain types of cases, you can't do a contingency fee contract. Family law, criminal law, it can't be based on the outcome.
Sure.
Whereas in injury work, wrongful death, plaintiff's work, product liability, these are all cases that we look at the case, we evaluate it, and if we think it has a chance of success, sometimes even when we aren't sure if it's going to have a chance of success, we will sign up the case, meet with the client, explain to them, look, either this is a great case and you don't have to pay us anything up front. Here's what you pay if we win. The amount, the percentages of what you get if you win, as you know, those are all mandated by law in Florida and,
right.
and by the Florida bar. And most states do the same thing. The percentages might vary state to state, but for the most part, that's how it works. But yeah, we have to make a business decision, just like any other business, that these cases aren't cheap. The experts, they charge a lot of money to look at the case, and we pay that. We front all the money, and that only gets paid back to us if we win or we resolve the case. So we have to make a business decision that we can't just sue every case that comes in. We got to say, whether or not there's a chance of success here. And one of the hard parts about aviation law is the insurance aspect. A lot of these general aviation accidents, which are primarily what you see because commercial aviation for the most part is very safe. You see a lot of, it could be corporate aircraft, it could be military aircraft. You don't worry about as much because if you're bringing a case in that aspect, it usually involves the government or a product liability case where it's a big manufacturer. So you're not really worried about the insurance. But any of these cases that involve, let's say somebody who charters a flight and charters a flight to the Bahamas. Well, that, the company that's the charter company might not have adequate insurance. They might not have any money. They might be going broke. The pilots usually don't have their own insurance. The maintainers of these aircraft usually don't have insurance.
Wow.
So one of the biggest problems with general aviation accidents is figuring out if somebody did something wrong, first, who was it? Do they have insurance? Because if you sue somebody and get a judgment and there's no insurance, then you're basically have a piece of paper that's not worth anything. And so that factors into the decision of how we determine if this is a case that we can bring. And, we might investigate a case for a couple of years. We almost have to if we're waiting on the Ntsb to determine what caused the accident, because we can't look at the aircraft until they're done with it. And once they're done with it, we'll tell the investigator that we're representing somebody in the accident, and generally they'll call us or send us a message that says, look, we've released the aircraft. You guys can, inspect it now. So we might have to take and the Ntsb has a different mission than we do. They're looking to make safety recommendations to the FAA. So they're not looking at every person that might be responsible or looking at, so this isn't a knock on the Ntsb. They have limited assets, just
Sure.
like a lot of government agencies. But their mission's different than ours. And so even if the Ntsb makes a decision as to, what the cause of the accident is, we might still have our experts go out and look at the aircraft and make our own determination, which happens a lot, because the Ntsb's determination isn't admissible in court. So their probable cause determination, when they say, hey, we believe this was the pilot's fault, or we believe that a part failed, you can use a lot of the information and the inspections and stuff and the testing that they use. You can use that in court. Your experts can use it, but you can't parrot the NTSB's, or you can't use the NTSB's probable cause determination. So you're not bound by it, which can be good in some situations and bad in some situations. If it's good for your client, you want to use it. If it's bad for your client, you don't want to come in anyways, and your experts may have a different opinion. So,
sure.
Yeah.
And I think that what you just said is one of the biggest challenges that we face as plaintiff attorneys is if we have a client call a law firm before us, or we have a client read online, they might, cast out their case before they even get it in front of somebody that could actually figure out what's going on. So
Right.
the point here, folks, is do not give up. Make sure you call the right person, because I've got some insurance clients that they've called 5 law firms, and thank God these clients will not give up. So by the time they call me and I accept it, they're like, okay, great.
Yeah.
And then
Are you sure?
yeah, and then we get it resolved. But the problem is they just were talking to the wrong attorney, right? It'd be like talking to me about, if somebody called me and said, hey, Chris, I just got a DUI, I'd be like, oh, that's unfortunate. But I know a
Right.
great criminal defense attorney, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to take that on, and I'm certainly not going to pretend like I know. But I always try to take it from a standpoint of, okay, if that was my family friend that was in, had a business dispute or something like that, I got to find somebody that can help them.
Right.
And I think with aviation law, anybody that's watching this, they need to call someone like you. And the other thing that you need to know too, folks, is that attorneys like Keith and I, even though we're licensed in a particular state, we partner with local counsel all over the country. I mean, we both take cases in federal court all over the country.
Right.
And we can do that because the state and federal law, as long as obviously the court grants us permission, would allow us, if we are in a state where we're not licensed, to partner up or co-counsel with a local firm, right? Is that what you do? So if you had a case, say, in think of a jurisdiction you're not licensed, is that what you would do if you had an accident there?
And aviation law lends itself to that. I mean, we have a case in Kenya right now.
We got to talk about that. How do you?
Well,
that's
that's actually one of my partners who just retired. But yeah, I mean, so he had to get admitted into Kenya, but he's still got local counsel in Kenya. And, that's not the ideal situation. That just was a case where there were no ties even to like England or Europe. It was basically just got, the only ties were to Africa. And so one of my partners has had to go over there and it's very different how they do things over there. But it's good. I mean, they handle their court well, but they don't have the resources we have here. So it's taken years. I mean, this case has gone on forever. But yeah, I mean, what you say is absolutely right. Like, even if you know an attorney, call that attorney and say, if you have a type of case, ask them for a referral, because most likely they're going to know somebody that does that type of law. And in aviation law, it's no different. But we have cases all over the country. Our office is only a couple blocks from the Duval County Courthouse. I don't think I have one case in Duval County right now. And I do other stuff besides just aviation. But me personally, I see judges at conferences. They're like, "Where you been?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm in Melbourne, and I'm in Arizona, and I'm in Delaware, and I'm in Washington State or Colorado," because aviation accidents, you're looking at, is it the man, is it the machine, or is it basically the weather, and it's going to be one of those things. So if it's the machine, you got to look at, okay, is it the maintainer, and where are they located? And planes obviously fly all over, and they might be getting their maintenance done in another state. They're not always just done locally. If it's a part and the part failed and you think it's a design defect, or you think it's something happened in the manufacturing process that weakened the part, you might have to sue that manufacturer where they're at home. And based on long-arm jurisdiction precedent, you can't just sue them always where the accident occurred. So, a lot of companies are incorporated in Delaware. They do that for the tax benefits. So they might have their home base in, Colorado, but they might be also incorporated in Delaware. And so you might be looking at the laws of Delaware and looking at the laws of Arizona and figuring out, okay, where do I have a where's my case going to be stronger? You know, what's my jury pool there? You might research verdicts in that area to see, okay, are the verdicts better in this state? Do I know local counsel up? You know, do I know an attorney up there that's I think will do a good job? What are the judges like? So you consider a lot of these things, but every aviation accident involves, you know, choice of law decisions. You know, if I file in this state, what law is going to apply? Is it going to be, and what law is going to apply to the liability portion of the case, as in, you know, whose fault the accident was, and whose law is going to apply to the damages, you know, because my clients might be Floridians, but their case is going to be in front of a Delaware judge or, you know, a Washington, D.C. judge or wherever it's filed. So those are all the considerations you got to make once you even figure out who you think is at fault. If it's the federal government, if you think like, okay, an air traffic controller gave this pilot bad instructions or didn't respond correctly when this pilot declared an emergency, the federal government, what you do is you have to go through an administrative claim process before you ever file a lawsuit. And that takes a while. And you have to wait for the government to either got to wait for 6 months after they get the claim if they don't make a decision before you can file a lawsuit, or you have to, or once they deny it, then you have a period of time within which you have to file a lawsuit. And if you don't follow those administrative claim, you know, rules and laws precisely, you lose your case. So these are all the different things you got to look at as you're looking at these accidents once you figure out who you think is at fault.
And even some of the parts, right? And this is, again, do not count yourself out. You got to call an attorney that knows what they're doing and can truly and properly evaluate this, because I'm thinking about all of the companies that are getting into space flight. I'm imagining, all right, Keith, we're going to send you up to orbit. You'll do a couple rotations and we're going to bring you back down, but you got to sign this waiver. This waiver says, you know, when we explode this thing, you know, 2 minutes into flight, there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
You and I both know, I mean, you better hope that is, you did absolutely everything proper, because those waivers usually aren't going to prohibit a lawsuit, right? I mean, but a family that doesn't know that, the company says, oh, look, your loved one signed a waiver.
Right. Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing that comes in a lot, and we're dealing with this with a couple cases right now, the Miami Air accident that happened in Jacksonville a couple years ago, where the plane coming from Cuba went to the water. We've got a number of passengers on that aircraft, and you know, you got to try to make a determination. All right, on international flights, you have international treaties that might apply, and so we're in a debate on that case right now, or you know, that's been briefed in front of a local federal judge as to whether or not it's this Montreal Convention, which can limit your rights. You know, can limit the types of damages you can get. Or whether or not it's Florida law, or you know, that actually can give you, you know, more damages than you might be entitled to under the convention. Same thing, like flying to the Bahamas. We have an accident that occurred in Fort Lauderdale from an aircraft coming from the Bahamas, and you know, people got on the flight and there was an accident, and some of them are injured, and they don't necessarily know what their rights are. And again, there's another international treaty that applies to that limits their damages. So, yeah, these are all things that it's complicated. You know, I tell people, look, just talk to an attorney first, even if the NTSB report comes out and says that it was, you know, this was the cause, you should still call an attorney. So, you know, at Spoor and Dodd, we look at cases. I spent 2 years on a case involving a midair military accident over Japan, you know, over the Sea of Japan, that ultimately there wasn't a case there. You know, there was nothing we could do, but it was rewarding to be involved and help the mother of this, you know, this F-18 pilot go through the process. You know, I've sat there with the generals that briefed her about the actions of her son in this accident. And initially they had blamed her son. And after a excellent Politico kind of investigative report came out, and we were also pushing from a legal side to get more information from the accident investigation that we didn't see in there, they hadn't provided, they reopened the investigation. And that type of pressure, ultimately what they determined was her son, although he shared some fault, I'm not going to say he was faultless, was not like solely to blame. He wasn't unqualified. So we went through the whole process. Ultimately, I had to say, ma'am, I'm sorry, you know, I can't bring a case for you, but I hope that you feel better about, you know, what you've learned, the fact that they've changed the determination from the military. And she was, you know, that she was like, look, I appreciate, you know, most people wouldn't have gone through this and never been paid a dime for it. So sometimes that's what we do. You know, that's not great for business, but at the same time, it can be. You know, she may refer a case to us in the future. That's not why I was doing it. I was doing it because I really was hoping there could be a case there. But ultimately, you know, when you're in the military and you get in an accident and, you know, it's determined to be, it could be your co-pilot's fault, it could be a crew member's fault, it could be the command structure, it could be maintenance. But the Ferries Doctrine prevents you from suing the military, right, even if the military is completely negligent.
We run into that in some of the military misdiagnosis or medical
Right.
malpractice, right? Ferres, you know, Ferres, for those of you that have never heard of that, Ferres is the one that limits you from suing the
Right.
government. The way that we use it is they say, well, it dates back to Vietnam. Somebody is in a combat zone and they have, you know, some sort of either medical or some sort of treatment that goes wrong, right? They're in the middle of a combat zone and they have some sort of medical procedure that goes awry. Can't sue the government for that. How that's expanded over the years is you got somebody here, you know, in the U.S. in a completely safe environment that gets completely screwed over.
Exactly.
Oh, sorry, can't sue over that.
Yeah,
Which,
I mean,
if it was a civilian case,
right.
I mean, they're lighting up a 7-8 figure case probably.
The original you know, it made sense. The original use of it was they didn't want people like attorneys coming in and second guessing, you know, officers' commands. Like if an officer says, take this hill or, you know, fly this helicopter into this place and everybody gets killed or injured in that accident, you can't go sue the officer for doing that. They don't. So that's kind of the original intent of it. But you're right. It's expanded to a point where if you're on active duty and it could be some, you know, something that's completely benign but causes, as far as like making wartime decisions, it might not involve that at all. And now you're prohibited from bringing any kind of case. What we do with those cases is we look a lot to see, you know, especially if it involves a vehicle or an aircraft, because most of those are not, they're not built by the military. They're not designed by the military. The military usually tells a contractor, look, we're looking for this type of airplane that does close air support. And then they get bidders come in and they go through the whole process of that. And the military will have a say in some of the design, but they're not designing it. You know, they're kind of saying, okay, this fits our criteria. It's got to do A, B, and C. If it does that, then we'll buy it from you for this price. So
And
there's
that's
another
similar-
defense. There's another defense that government contractors get to use. And so that's kind of where that comes into play. And what they'll say is, look, we fall into the shoes of the government because we designed this according to their precise specifications. And so in certain cases, that can prohibit you from bringing a case against the contractor. And we had a real big case on that involving Blackwater, where they tried to do that. And we were actually successful. They flew a plane into the side of a mountain that killed a colonel. And our firm sued Blackwater before I was there. It went up to the 11th Circuit, and you know they appealed it, and we won. And basically, what they were saying is like, look, we were doing exactly what the military said. We were, you know, basically we are the U.S. government. We're part of the military, and the military did not, you know, the government didn't come in to defend them on that. They had to have their own attorneys. And ultimately, what the court decided is like, no, listen, you guys decided the route you were going to fly. You guys decided, you know, how to conduct this mission. And so it's kind of a narrow lane for success sometimes, but you got to, understand what the law prohibits. You also got to have a good understanding of the military, the type of military operations and the flight operations. And, you know, that's where, you know, at least as far as myself, I feel I can bring my experience in the military and aviation, you know, aviation maintenance, and the way that those types of flights are conducted to investigate cases like that and take a deeper look where, another aviation firm might have said, look, we just don't think there's anything here. Get a second opinion. It's just like if a doctor tells you got cancer and you want a second opinion, do the same thing with your case, because we have numerous cases where we've taken a second look at something or third or fourth look and found something and brought a case, and then the firm that sent it to us, the next case they have, they don't send it to us because they're like, let's keep looking at it. That's happened a couple times. So
that's what we preach about on this show every week. Second opinion,
Yeah.
And I'd love to have you back, because that government contractor defense that you're talking about, I think, is also what 3M and Aero tried to use in the dual-ended combat earplug litigation.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't think they've been successful with that defense. I mean, you're involved in some of that litigation, but we'd love to have you back to talk about more of the 3M type stuff. The hard part about military cases is that we've got all of these different codes and laws and federal statutes and benefits that are available to, somebody that served in Vietnam compared to Iraq is going to have completely different benefits and rights available. So obviously with those earplugs, 03 to 15, right? I mean, we've got sort of a narrow window, but would love to chat more about that sometime. But I think we are getting close to the end here.
We might be.
Casey?
Yeah. By the way, we should say if you have a aviation law question, need the help of Keith, give him a call, 904-309-6500. Sometimes I can't read my own writing. A lot of exclusive content on the podcast this week. You can find it on Chris's website, broshoelaw.com, or his YouTube page, which is...
I think it's just Brochu Law. But if you need anything in the meantime, case at broshoelaw.com. I actually had someone reach out. They didn't like that I used umbrella. They said I should be using the word uniform. And I'm like, look, I'm not in the military. Like, I don't know, the military.
For what?
Well, I always phonetically spell my name Bravo, Romeo, Oscar, Charlie, Hotel, Umbrella. But I never realized, like, most of that is military, I guess, phonetics.
Yeah.
So I got an email from a guy, and he's like, it's uniform, it's not umbrella. And I'm like, I don't know what this guy's talking about. And then I'm like, oh, he thinks that I'm trying to be like military.
Right.
Sorry, folks. I guess I should look into it. I'll start saying uniform. So Bravo, Romeo, Oscar, Charlie, Hotel, uniform. Case,
Underwear.
Thank you. Case at broshoelaw.com. My direct dial, 904-201-1771. Keith.
Yeah, great being
pleasure.
here. Yeah,
Absolute
look forward
pleasure.
to coming back.
We'll talk to you again next week. Protecting military families on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk.